That's a reality for me. I love the people I work with. I love the people that are my family members, and I particularly...
At 69, Johnny Rotten, born John Lydon and forever etched in history as the snarling face of punk rock rebellion, has stunned fans with revelations that completely upend the myth of what punk truly was. While the public remembers him as the chaotic frontman of the Sex Pistols, the man who screamed no future and terrorized the establishment with spitting rants and safety pins, behind the sneer was a musical mind that was far more complex and sophisticated than most ever imagined. Today, Offstage Tales dives deep into Rotten's private record collection to uncover a side of him the public never saw, one filled with emotional depth, intellectual rebellion, and surprising taste. These are not the kinds of influences that fit neatly into the leather and mohawk image punk came to represent. Quite the opposite. From avant-garde blues to orchestral nightmares, from experimental Jamaican dub to frozen gothic folk, Rotten's 6 favorite musicians are a paradoxical blueprint of what punk was truly built upon. Not just noise, not just anger, but fearless authenticity and artistic evolution. These are not casual listens. They are obsessions that challenged every musical rule, inspiring Rotten to create a legacy of chaos built on careful, often shocking artistic study. If you thought punk was about simplicity, prepare to have that illusion shattered. This is not just a list. It's a revelation that forces us to reconsider the very DNA of rebellion. And what Johnny Rotten exposes here might just change how we see the punk movement forever. But the name that kicks off this list, it might be the weirdest of all. At number 6 on Johnny Rotten's list stands a name that perfectly mirrors his disdain for the mainstream yet pushes the boundaries of rebellion even further, Captain Beefheart. Known for his surrealist lyrics and chaotic soundscapes, Beefheart's album Trout Mask Replica became a kind of sacred text for Rotten, not just musically but philosophically. It wasn't about catchy hooks or stage antics. It was about obliterating the idea that music needed to conform to structure, melody, or even logic. Rotten reportedly discovered the album in the mid-70s and instantly declared it the sound of real rebellion, not against politics or culture, but against the very framework of music itself. For him, Beefheart wasn't just weird, he was pure, creating art that didn't care about acceptance, success, or even comprehension. While the rest of the industry was chasing radio hits and platinum records, Beefheart was crafting what Rotten called music in its own universe. It was challenging, often unpleasant, but always honest, and that to Rotten was everything punk stood for. He didn't just listen to it, he lived by it. In interviews, Rotten would fiercely defend Beefheart from critics who called his work unlistenable, saying, "If it's easy to digest, it's not challenging anything." The influence would ripple through Rotten's own work with Public Image Limited, especially in their willingness to break rhythm, defy melody, and speak in a language only true rebels could understand. Captain Beefheart wasn't just an influence. He was Rotten's artistic soulmate, proof that the loudest scream could come from music no one else even understood. And yet, if that surprised you, the next name on his list might leave you completely speechless. Coming in at number 5 is a man who began as a pop heartthrob and ended up a musical ghost haunting the outer limits of sound, Scott Walker. To most, Walker was the dreamy voice behind the Walker Brothers, a teen idol of the 60s who sang syrupy ballads with cinematic flair. But to Johnny Rotten, he was something far more dangerous, an artist who willingly obliterated his own fame to chase a darker, more terrifying form of truth. Rotten discovered Walker's solo albums in 1976 and became mesmerized by the artist's metamorphosis. Here was a man who went from chart-topping crooner to composer of what Rotten described as orchestral nightmares, a musical world of dread, abstraction, and beauty so raw it bordered on emotional terrorism. This wasn't just a shift in style, it was an act of artistic suicide, and Rotten admired it deeply. "That's real punk," he once told Malcolm McLaren. Destroying your own success to find something true. And Walker did just that, abandoning adoring fans and radio hits in favor of twisted soundscapes, alienating lyrics, and haunting theatricality. Rotten began incorporating that influence into his own music, especially in Public Image Ltd's more experimental phases. He studied Walker's vocal techniques, his dramatic pauses, his refusal to offer emotional resolution. And in doing so, he proved that punk wasn't about being loud, it was about being fearless. To Rotten, Scott Walker was the warning no one heard, that the real rebellion isn't in rejection but in transformation. But even this descent into darkness couldn't prepare us for what came next. Landing at number 4 is the legendary Jamaican dub producer Lee "Scratch" Perry, a man whose name might seem like an odd detour from punk's snarling streets until you listen deeper. For Johnny Rotten, Perry was less of a musician and more of a mad scientist, turning studio gear into weapons of psychological warfare. When Rotten first heard Perry's dub experiments in a friend's flat in Notting Hill, he didn't just enjoy the sound, he was reborn by it. Here was music that didn't just defy structure, it defied gravity. Echoes looped endlessly, rhythms warped time itself, and every track sounded like it had been pulled from the edge of reality. Rotten was transfixed, calling Perry's work controlled chaos and describing it as music that makes sense only when you stop trying to understand it. This wasn't about reggae. This was about sonic rebellion. Perry didn't polish tracks, he exploded them, and that resonated with Rotten's belief that silence and noise are equal instruments. He adopted Perry's philosophy into his own production style, using space as sound, building tension with absence, and letting madness drive the mix. Rotten famously said, "Scratch Perry proves that the best art comes from the edge of sanity," and in doing so, aligned himself with a tradition that valued creation over convention. Punk and dub, though worlds apart on the surface, shared a DNA of disruption. And for Rotten, Perry wasn't just an inspiration, he was a warning that genius often wears the mask of madness. But the next influence proves that Rotten's tastes weren't just strange, they were outright shocking. In a twist that defied punk's war on prog rock, Johnny Rotten revealed his admiration for one of the most cerebral and theatrical bands of the 70s, Van der Graaf Generator. Yes, the very genre punk was said to destroy, Rotten embraced in secret, but not for its complexity alone. What gripped him about Van der Graaf wasn't just their time signatures or extended arrangements, it was their raw, unfiltered emotional violence. When he first heard Pawn Hearts in 1975 at a house party, he was frozen in place by Peter Hamill's vocals, later stating, "That man screams like his life depends on it." And that to Rotten was punk. Underneath the swirling organs and philosophical lyrics was a level of intensity that no three-chord punk song could match. He called it beautiful violence, music that used sophistication not to pacify but to strike with precision. This revelation reframed what rebellion could sound like. Rotten began defending prog rock's value, arguing that intelligence didn't dilute power, it weaponized it. His own later music began to show traces of Van der Graaf's theatricality, longer structures, and abstract lyrical themes. Punk fans may have scoffed, but Rotten insisted that authenticity wasn't limited to simplicity. Van der Graaf taught him that complexity, when fused with genuine emotion, could be just as dangerous as a distorted power chord. And with that, the foundations of punk began to shift under its own weight. But nothing could prepare audiences for Rotten's next confession, an influence rooted in the unlikeliest of places. At number 2, Johnny Rotten dropped a name that caught even his most loyal fans off guard, Neil Young. Yes, the introspective Canadian folk rocker who sang of heartaches and harvests became one of punk's most revered icons, at least in Rotten's eyes. But this wasn't about genre. It was about principle. Rotten discovered Tonight's the Night in 1976 and instantly connected with the raw vulnerability that bled through every track. Here was an artist who didn't just evolve, he refused to remain the same. Young would burn down his own sound just to escape predictability, a trait Rotten considered the highest form of rebellion. He told Rolling Stone, "Neil Young changes direction every time people think they've figured him out." That relentless pursuit of authenticity, even at the cost of commercial success, struck a deep chord with Rotten. It mirrored his own refusal to reunite the Sex Pistols for Nostalgia Tour, and his stubborn insistence on pushing forward with public image limited despite the backlash. For Rotten, Neil Young wasn't a folk hero, he was a revolutionary. Someone who showed that true artistic integrity means betraying expectations, even if those expectations come from your biggest fans. He saw in Young a kindred spirit who would rather be hated for truth than loved for repetition. And if that seems like the strangest twist in Rotten's legacy, then brace yourself. Because his number 1 influence takes everything you thought you knew and freezes it in haunting silence. And finally, sitting atop Johnny Rotten's list at number 1 is Nico, the haunting ice-cold chanteuse of the Velvet Underground whose solo work delved into places even punk was afraid to go. This revelation stunned fans, but for Rotten it was never a mystery. He discovered the Marble Index in a London record store in 1974, and what he heard wasn't just music. It was raw, unfiltered, existential truth. "She sings like she's already dead," he told friends, "but somehow more alive than anyone else." Nico didn't try to please, she didn't ask for acceptance. She existed in what Rotten called a frozen universe of beautiful isolation, music that stood in defiance of connection, emotion, even melody. That kind of purity, that willingness to be entirely unlikable, captivated him. While others sought applause, Nico sought truth, and for Rotten that made her the ultimate rebel. She didn't just ignore commercial success, she repelled it. In a world of phoniness, she was hauntingly real. Rotten admired her refusal to apologize, to soften, or to explain. To him, Nico was proof that honesty is sometimes ugly, sometimes cold, but always necessary. Her influence echoes in Rotten's darkest lyrics, his most withdrawn moments, and his commitment to never compromise. She didn't just inspire him, she haunted him. And with that, we see the final thread connecting all of Rotten's influences. Johnny Rotten, once believed to be the anarchist who wanted to burn everything down, now emerges as a man whose rebellion was fueled not by ignorance, but by intellectual curiosity and emotional depth. His record collection was not a playlist of rage, but a tapestry of contradictions: avant-garde blues, orchestral terror, dub chaos, progressive complexity, folk independence, and frozen gothic isolation. These weren't just his favorite artists, they were extensions of his psyche. Each one represented a piece of punk's hidden soul. Beefheart's madness, Walker's artistic suicide, Perry's chaos, Hamill's violence, Young's independence, and Nico's eternal void. Together they tell a story that no punk anthem ever could, that rebellion is more than rage. It is the courage to challenge, evolve, alienate, and transform. Rotten's taste shattered the myth that punk was simple, proving instead that it was built on layers of tension, contradiction, and vision. This wasn't a list. It was a confession. And perhaps the most shocking truth of all is that the loudest voice in punk was also the most thoughtful listener. So now that the veil has been lifted on Johnny Rotten's most sacred musical inspirations, one burning question remains. Did you see any of this coming? For years, fans and critics alike believed Rotten was the embodiment of pure punk fury, the symbol of youthful rage with no room for sophistication, no tolerance for the melodic or the abstract. But this list of his 6 favorite musicians rewrites that legacy entirely. From Captain Beefheart's dissonant defiance to Nico's frozen emotional detachment, Rotten's taste is not just unexpected, it's revelatory. These aren't just artists he admired. These were spiritual guides, each one teaching him a different lesson in what it means to rebel not with fists, but with integrity, innovation, and unapologetic weirdness. If you expected 3-chord punk influences or shout-along anthems, think again. What you got instead was a masterclass in outsider genius, a roadmap of rebellion that spans jazz, dub, prog, experimental, and beyond. This is your invitation to revisit your assumptions, not just about Johnny Rotten, but about what it means to be a true artist. So which one shocked you the most, Scott Walker, Lee Scratch Perry, the prog rock of Van der Graaf generator, or was it Nico, the ice queen of art rock, standing proudly at number 1? Drop your thoughts in the comments and let's talk about it. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing a punk can do is admit he listens to Nico. Don't forget to subscribe for more mind-blowing music stories and hidden truths behind the legends you thought you knew. The noise is only the beginning.